Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here for this panel. So one of our biggest concerns coming up was actually not falling down the stairs. So we've made it. We've already halfway there, basically. So we can all agree that XR can transform. I mean, this is something that I think there's consensus here because we're all here. But here we see, nope. There we go. Here we can see XR transforming the Victoria Concert Hall in Singapore by showcasing some history, some local culture, and actually there's like an instrument playing thing where you use your phone to augment the experience with Merle's immersive adventure. But not everyone and not always is this true. So when I interviewed a lot of practitioners in the field, some of the concerns were around technology is just an enabler. It has been over-egged as to what it can do. It is no substitute for storytelling. And even more dramatically, we mapped Dublin's Heritage Trail graveyard. All the apps built in the last 10 years no longer work. So why is that? Why do we see this kind of downfall of many XR experiences and cultural heritage? And part of the reason is that heritage, whether physical or digital, requires authenticity. Without it, it's just a rock, it's just an app. And it must respect accuracy, tell meaningful stories, and also connect us to our past. The question is, how can we do that in a meaningful way? And how can we do that at scale? And we'll try to answer some of those questions today through this panel, as big and difficult as they might be. So I've got Yolanda Tromp here and Ajit Padmanabh. And we're going to try and answer some of these questions. And let's jump straight into the difficult ones. In your work, how is it that you define authenticity? And then how do you actually implement it without sacrificing it for what tourism brings and scaling and things like that? How do you do that in your day-to-day work with XR? And we'll start with Yolanda for this one.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really important question. Basically, we have to implement a collaboration process from the start and get the cultural experts involved from the beginning. And very often the cultural experts will be involved at the beginning and at the end when it comes to the validation. But really what we need to do is to bring them all into the process. So it's a commitment to the process. It's all about human-centered design. And I think one of the problems here that you can imagine is that we try to simplify everything that we build in order to bring down the computational load. And this is why we have icons to bring down the information that we send across and share. And so here is an example of the work of my studio, Click Studio, at the university where I work in Vietnam, Duy Tan University. And you can see that we have simplified the world and brought it down to the essence. But you can imagine that when we do that, we also end up bringing the risk of stereotyping. And I think this is why we really need to be careful and bring the experts in from the start and in the middle and at various touch points that we design into the process.
Thank you, Yolanda. And Ajit?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me here and wonderful audience. I think it's the non-negotiable that I refer to in terms of authenticity. You see, all of us have studied history in the school and never after that. And we realize that we lack a connection with our past, with our heritage, where we come from. And that's why we are called who we are. The idea is to leverage virtual reality technology to understand who we are and where we come from. Essentially, history without authenticity is fiction. And while fiction sells, history demands a certain prudence of the knowledge aspects, because that is the only way we can give an ode to our ancestry in terms of the values that they have cherished for millennia, and can we kind of further that using the technologies of today. So for example, when it comes to authenticity, we at Who We Are work with historians and archaeologists, oceanographers, to represent the ancient heritage of India, the country where I come from. And what you see here is a 3D scanned monument in the western part of India, which dates back to 6000 before Common Era. And using virtual reality technology and the historians' knowledge in terms of their excavated details and manuscripts, we end up creating the entire city. This is one of the earliest cities in the world to have multi-floor encampments. This entire civilization is the Indus Valley civilization, which many of you would have read in your school. And this was known for water management and brick structures that could withstand high temperatures. 6000 BCE, and that's the kind of knowledge factors that these ancestors worked with. And our duty is to just showcase the way it used to be back then. And this is where authenticity plays a role. Each of these buildings were reviewed by the historians, and they confirmed that, yes, this is how it used to look. So there were some corrections during the development workflow that we had, and we had to correct them. So I'll stop there, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you. I think both of you pointed out that there's so many people behind these processes. And a lot of those people are historians, experts, and so forth. And these teams are huge. Like, it looks like a small kind of virtual world that you walk into, or sometimes a big one, and the amount of people that have to inform those decisions is massive. And deciding whose voices to listen to can be a real challenge, because from firsthand experience, I know there's people going, but we need this, but we need that. This is wrong, this is right. How do you make that decision? And so, Yolanda, I wanted to know, when working with all of this kind of range of people, and I know you work on all these different types of projects, how do you make sure the voices that you include are truly representative, and you avoid marginalization? So at what point does inclusion happen, and where maybe it gets lost in your experience?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So to continue with the simplification process, we need to have the cultural experts as the co-producers in the process. So I have created this business model canvas specifically for that purpose, in order to be able to ask the right questions during the design process. And this kind of prompts the discussion, and it is not a theory, it's actually a tool to discuss the production as a process during the whole of the conception, but also during the more difficult questions. What do we simplify? Because we want to amplify the meaning, and at the same time we need to simplify it to keep the computational load low. So as an example, if I say, we are talking about which country are you from, and I say tulip and windmills, you might immediately think about the country that I was born, the Netherlands. And so this is an example of how we simplify things, but we must not lose the meaning. And this is why asking the right questions continuously is incredibly important. So it's a co-design process, and that should be more than words. It should be really implemented from the beginning, and have very clearly defined touch points that we all agree on and actually execute as we go through the process of building. And the validation should not only come at the end, but at multiple points during that time.
That's actually really interesting that you speak about the co-design process. Yesterday, when chatting with Ajit, he mentioned that some of the things that happen in the background involve also local skill skilled workers, let's say, or skilled experts who aren't historians. And could you talk a little bit more about, beyond user design and history, what's the local impact of your work?
Well, it's a very, very pertinent question. And a lot of history that we speak about is largely localized. There are folk stories, there are art forms like dance, painting, wall painting, all of that, which is driven by the core historical aspect of that particular land. But at the same time, it is localized using materials that the ancients would use back then. India is rich in it, and so is the rest of Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world. We at Who We Are believe that unless history is owned and cherished by the locals, the idea behind our company of instilling a sense of self-worth, a sense of belief in oneself will be defeated. So for us, local empowerment plays a huge role. And how we do that is by working with the local artists, local folklore guys, the elders as we call them, because they come with a treasure trove of stories of their history and heritage. At the same time, we employ them at our experience centers, which we operate out of the lesser known cities or villages in India. Note that this is cutting edge technology, employing absolutely underprivileged local communities. So we believe that, they kind of become very proud of what they are doing, and they help in further democratizing this entire access loop that we are in, right? Most of us come from a very privileged background. We've stayed in cities across the world. For us, technology is, basic. For them, it's not. So I think there are two levels of local empowerment here. One is employment. The other one is their cherished heritage, which is valued globally. I think that's how we look at it.
Perfect, thank you. And I think this local aspect, an inclusive aspect, is so important, and it's really difficult. And as you pointed out, when the history is not informed by history, it's just fiction, right? But there is no perfect history. It's still informed by someone, and there's no perfect project. So I wanted to take us a little bit into an uncomfortable territory of sharing some of the challenges that we face, and hopefully have a bit of an honest conversation of how to find balance in those challenges. Because obviously, yes, you want to make everything extremely accurate and extremely local and extremely informed by everyone, but that's essentially impossible. So how do you balance meaning with actually, making money, scaling, implementing in a way that people can have access to as well? Yolanda, I'll start with you.
Okay. So I think, first of all, we want to think of the people who are the cultural experts as part of the infrastructure. So they are not people that provide the content per se and only that, but they need to be part of the infrastructure. So I think my previous answers kind of already emphasized that a lot. So I actually want to give you a really clear example of misunderstandings, because this is where we really want to problem solve the whole process, right? How can we be as good as we can be? And one of the things I noticed through my research is that we have a lot of different stakeholders in the room when we develop cultural applications, especially if we want to include tourism innovation in this as well. We have so many different experts that we all have different vocabulary, but we also use similar terms at the same time that have a different interpretation, a different meaning within each discipline. So we are trying to work interdisciplinary, and we are trying to work out the terms of collaboration, of engagement. And so as an example, for instance, the word scaling, what does it mean to different disciplines? If you start at the beginning of the project by clarifying the vocabulary, then you are onto a much clearer discussion. And this is also where the business model canvas and the discussion that that creates will help a lot. But for instance, scale. If I say scaling, then maybe the developers will think, okay, we need to make it sure that we can have as many users in this application as possible. Whereas if I say scaling to the designers, they might think, okay, we need to create assets and we need to make sure that we can actually hand those over and that we can reuse the assets. If I say scaling to a cultural expert, they might think, okay, they are going to flatten my narrative and simplify the message that I want to convey. How can I stop this from happening, or how can I influence that thinking? And if I say scaling and I'm an investor, I might think, okay, now we are going to talk about where do I get return on my investment. And so you can see immediately, if we're talking about scaling, the discussion already becomes confused because we don't know from each other as discipline which part are we actually focusing on. And then we can talk about the pipeline, same problem. But there are obviously many, many examples that you might be able to think of that can influence this. So we almost need a dictionary, a glossary of terms.
Excellent. So, I mean, in terms of the challenges for us, twofold. One is people, which she was alluding to. The other one is technology. I'll speak about people for a minute and then the tech. For us, the North Star is the authentic history and heritage recreation, that it is a passionate retelling for the local community. So there are, most of the time, conflicting histories with respect to folk and with respect to the archaeologically scientific excavated history. And we try to bridge those gaps by way of either interactive experiences or presentations, where the mainstay is the archaeological evidence-based experience, and we embed videos that talk about the folk stories so that both of them get the fair share of optics. Of course, there have been conflicts, and the way we deal with this North Star is our ancestry, our heritage, and we absolutely have to respect that. So if we have to cut away with certain aspects of the storytelling that's going to dilute that North Star, we kind of get away with it. In terms of technology, because authenticity is non-negotiable, we work on high-end graphics. These are 3D scan monuments reaching up to 10 terabytes of storage space. And we create city walkthroughs, right, for 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, using a lot of technology, a lot of GPUs. So that is a challenge that we plug in terms of our costing and all of that. And I mean, since we are bootstrapped, we are at the freedom to kind of decide on all of these. I hope, as the keynote speaker said, the technology becomes lighter. And I'd love to use spectacles for our experiences, provided they have the high-end processing power that can render our content. I'm hoping that happens, and one of the challenges is out of the window.
So now we've talked about challenges, and obviously there are many, but what is your advice to deliver scalable XR authenticity? And it's a big question, and I'll ask you just to give kind of one piece of advice that you think is essential, because obviously we can go on about it for another hour or so. But I'll go to you first. What is your advice to those working on XR and cultural heritage? How do you deliver scalable XR authenticity?
Excellent. The advice that I'll give to XR creators, freelancers, whoever's operating in the realms of culture and heritage, please talk to the forebearers of the monuments that you're covering, of the cities that you talk about, of the heritage of certain cultural attire, costumes, jewelry. All of these are tangible and intangible heritage. Talk to the guys who are practicing it, and you'll get the correct perspective that is required for any of your storytelling. The other advice is maybe a little controversial, but please stay away from generative AI. It has no idea about history. It knows much lesser than what we know about our history. And stay away from generative AI.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. You made me think with that last remark, but I would love to talk to you more about it. So yes, my advice is to walk the talk. And so I showed you a little bit about the game that we developed, and we are a studio that makes these types of applications. We use a green room for the real natural body movements, but everything else was recreated to a very painstaking detail by actually going on location and taking lots of photos and making this ourselves. So this is really interesting. We actually have a booth here where you can experience the game, and you can also come and ask us questions if you want to develop things. We are definitely happy to advise you. This QR code is my LinkedIn, so please connect with me. And I also have an article out with 10 use cases, which I will be presenting a little bit later in the room too. But my advice is really simple: usability, user-centered research, and inclusiveness. Include in the process the co-design with the actual experts, and make sure that they feel heard and understood by providing a shared vocabulary to collaborate. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you both. Instead of wrap-up remarks from me, I'd love to give the floor to anyone who would like to ask a question. I think we have time for one question. We have about 2 minutes left. So would anyone like to ask the panelists anything? I can't actually see the people. So if whoever is doing the roaming mic could... Anybody? Yes?
We talked about being bootstrapped versus freedom and how that plays into ethics.
You have a mic coming.
Oh, hello, thank you. We talked about bootstrap versus freedom and having the control to decide how ethical and how informed we're going to make the experiences. Also from the education side, is that easier? I mean, once you're actually making the money or commercializing or having a big exhibition and funders and investors, etc., what's the point of the payoff there? And do you understand what I'm asking you?
Do you have a specific... Do you want to ask someone in particular?
It can be to either of you. I think
Okay.
you both are maybe facing
Perfect.
that.
So I'll keep it quick. There is a reason why a startup is bootstrapped against why it's invested into, in the sense that, see, a lot of history and heritage is primarily driven by foundations and NGOs in the education space. We, as a for-profit company, are operating in the education and tourism space. So the freedom with bootstrapped is obvious. In terms of scalability, yes, there are challenges in being bootstrapped because there's only little that we can do. And it's very, very tempting to get investors interested in us, and they're seeking out to work with us. But again, the North Star, as I said, is the authentic history. And there is a tendency to weaponize history. And at any stage, we would want to avoid that aspect. As best as we can, we keep our costs in control. We have a very, very small team, multi-skilled. The 3D asset guy is also an environment designer, also a gamer. right? So we kind of get these mixed roles and optimize our development workflow, pipeline, all of it, keeping the cost low, and hoping to scale in this year.
I think we're out of time, but thank you for that question. I think you two can just continue the conversation after. And thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.